I love how much sometimes you really enjoy me and sometimes you're just so over me. I think it is one of the my favorite parts of our entire relationship. And the fact that it shifts from like moment to moment. I love
I
it.
started recording, so if you could just go ahead now.
I know you did. Uh, oh.
It was very.
Hello,
It's
friends.
gonna be a good one.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. I'm Brent Hazelton, incoming artistic director of Milwaukee Chamber Theater, welcoming you once again to Milwaukee Chamber Theater's Drunk Dramaturgy. With me, as always, the strange lady in the corner, Ms. Kimberly Colburn, currently doing her best Ed McMahon from the wilds of Toronto, Canada. And joining us today, I am super, super excited. Well, we both are. I don't want to speak for Kimberly, but I know she's excited too, to have with us Tanya Palmer, former buddy from just outside at the Goodman Theater, where she was director of new play development. Now she is at Indiana University, where she is a professor starting an MFA dramaturgy program, because the world needs another one of those, I guess. But it's still super cool. And Tanya is also a dramaturg. Welcome, Tanya. How are you?
I'm good, Brent. Thank you very much. Nice to be here. On
Important
Drunk
first
Drama.
question. What are you drinking?
Oh, yeah, we forgot that.
Oh, okay. So during the COVID, I joined this wine club where they send me bottles of wine over, I order it on the internet. It comes to my door. So this is one of those bottles. It's a Merlot Cab blend.
Excellent. Welcome, fellow Canadian.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So what are we talking about today?
So I was going to talk about the literary manager, because I know, you talked about what is a dramaturg, or what is dramaturgy, right, with Isaac Gomez. And I feel like literary managers sometimes get a bad rap. And so I want to just talk a little bit about like what the history of that role is, and why and sort of just defend them, to say like, to make my pitch for why the literary manager should be held up. So the first literary manager was a guy named John Corbin. He was the first literary manager in the English speaking world, and he was hired in 1909 by a New York theater called the New Theater. And this was a theater that was basically like funded by a bunch of wealthy industrialists who wanted to have an art theater, a national theater that would showcase both classic works and international repertory, and then also develop new American plays. And this guy, John Corbin, was a critic and a playwright, and he was hired to be the first literary manager. And the literary manager as a title was created in this plan. This British plan. And his role was, like what literary managers and dramaturgs do in some ways now. Like he was to find plays for the repertory. So both, to find classic works that might be relevant and might suit the company, foreign plays that they could either translate or that were in translation they could present. And then he was supposed to find new American plays. And this was advertised somewhat widely, and so he got a ton of scripts. And the problem, I would say, is that, well, from what I've read about it, the problem was there wasn't really an infrastructure to support American playwriting at that moment. So a lot of people, like we all have gotten those submissions where it's like, Grandpa
wrote a play.
Yeah, like your aunt wrote a play, like everybody's got a play, right? Mm-hmm. So he got a lot of those plays, and basically was
first pile.
First pile.
Yeah, first pile. So he got a lot of plays, and he, basically got overwhelmed, and they weren't very good. So basically, he only lasted in the job, I think, like a year and a half, and then he quit. Even though he was paid, this is something quite remarkable. He was paid very handsomely. I don't remember the exact figure, but like for the time.
It was like comparable to an actual salary?
Yeah, it was like a pretty good salary.
That's weird.
Yeah, and they like announced him in the paper. Like it was kind of a big deal, right? Yeah. But he quit, and then the theater, fell apart fairly quickly. Essentially, I think because it was this idea of an art theater, but they didn't really have an audience at that moment. There wasn't actually an interest in what they were doing at that point.
And they probably didn't also have federal subsidies.
They did not. They were funded basically by wealthy people,
Dilettantes.
Yeah. So that folded, but it was kind of, I would say, like the beginning of, or a precursor to what happened in the 60s, which is when literary managers and dramaturgs really came to be a thing in the United States. And so from even that early point, I mean, it was very much connected to the idea of developing a Native American theater. So that's, and then there started to be a lot of infrastructure around new plays and new play development, which is, I think, why the literary managers who came later had a little more to work with in terms of like what was being submitted to them. So there was like the O'Neill Center was one of the kind of early support systems and generators for new plays. The regional theaters around the country started hiring literary managers or dramaturg. There is this division in some ways between what the dramaturg does, and then the literary manager. Even though often it might be the same person doing both roles, or it might be two separate people. But the dramaturgy part is kind of like the part where you get to go to the library and do a lot of research, or you get to sit in rehearsal and genuinely intense artistic conversations with your collaborators. Dramaturgy is like having those punctuation / metaphor conversations. And it might be like writing notes for the audience and all that kind of stuff. So it's like very brainy and deep and researchy. Whereas literary management is kind of like, oh, you read plays and you log them into something on your computer. And then I think also there's this sense that it's the gatekeeper function, right? Like that your main job is to basically like tell people no a lot, like reject plays, right? Which is fair.
It's still true.
It's still true, and that's fair, and that is a part of the job. Obviously, we all know that. Like, you get a lot of plays as a literary manager, and
I don't think it's a bad thing to be a gatekeeper.
No, it's not a bad thing. I mean, that's the role. Like, not everybody's play needs to be produced. Not everybody's play needs to be produced at that particular theater. Mm-hmm. Like that is all true. But I think that what can sometimes get overlooked is that, yes, literary managers are about, part of your job is about pushing things away, like saying no and sending things back. And, but the other part of the job is about like pulling things towards you, right? Like it's about not just reading and responding to what's being given to you, but actually like actively seeking out new voices, actively seeking out opportunities for writers. So there was this guy named Arthur Ballet, who was a theater professor at University of Minnesota and a director, but he also ran Office for Advanced Drama Research, which started in 1963.
Sounds like a think tank.
1978. With funding from the Rockefeller Foundation. And he basically like just got a bunch of plays sent to him. Like, so he would read 5 plays a day, unproduced plays. And then he was basically functioning as like a literary office for the entire American theater. Like he would read all these plays. And the goal of the whole program was to provide opportunities for like new and experimental work. But he read all these plays, he sent them out, and he also published multiple collections of these plays, which he called Playwrights for Tomorrow. I think like now you can see, literary managers who are really like thinking about how can we push the form forward in new ways, like advocating for expanding what kinds of writers are being produced, like the Kilroys, sort of like pointing out things about who's not being produced and how do we highlight that and how do we find active ways of transforming the field. Or someone I've been thinking who I really admire right now, a young dramaturg, Regina Victor in Chicago, who's like merging, the role of critic with dramaturg and also advocate and looking at new ways. So, I mean, I feel like the thing about the literary manager side of it, which, as I said, like can feel like the lame administrative / like Debbie Downer part of being a dramaturg, is also the part of being a dramaturg that I think is connected to like thinking about systems and thinking about like how do we change the overall system that we're working in, and how do we create new opportunities for people? How do I like seek out new writers, seek out new forms, and think more proactively about how to make the American theater a more inclusive and more innovative place. Now, do people fail at that all the time? Sure. And do some people not take on that responsibility? Sure, of course. And do some people take on that responsibility, but they work at an institution that doesn't listen to them? Sure, absolutely. But I also think like sometimes, but anyway, I think that literary management, I mean, it's a lame, I think part of the problem is it's like a lame thing. Like it sounds like you're managing the literature, you know, which doesn't sound so sexy.
Not so sexy.
But I think if you think of it as like launching the literature, like into outer space.
Oh, literary launcher.
Yeah.
That's
like
such a better title. Why don't we adopt that? That's so good.
Like maybe we just need to come up with a new name, but I feel like it's an honorable, venerable, you know, role that should be honored and venerated.
For sure. And as you were saying, the best of them are the ones who try to fill in the gap.
Venerated. Here's my rebuttal.
Mm-hmm.
Could not agree more about the titling. I particularly think we need to throw out the word dramaturg. It doesn't make sense and nobody knows what it is. And if you have a title that doesn't make sense and nobody knows what it is, you're never gonna get traction. Which leads to the second part of my argument. Literary management is great in conceptually the way that you've laid it out. I am all for it. Here's the problem. The regional theater has adopted it as a model by which that they can use it as the no person gatekeeper and be marginalized, so that that person holds no position of power and literally is just a paper pusher who kind of does some cool work sometimes, but on the whole is not able and not put into a position where they have a seat at the table to decision make and make real change and affect the kind of change that you're talking about. Because if you are following the Michael Dixon model, which I'm super all about, they would call that a producer in theater nowadays. And I don't think that literary manager as a title or a concept can hold its own weight in the world that we live in today, in the way the ecosystem works. I think that it is one of the ways in which the organization continues to silo itself. And it also positions the literary manager as being the dramaturgical expert. And I don't actually believe that that one person could ever hold that amount of power for any project ever. And in fact, should be a repository and a gatherer of that sort of information from every single person in that building who comes to see the show, from every patron that walks through the door, to the box office manager, to the production assistant, to the marketing assistant, to the guy that runs the social media. Every single person has an opinion that is valuable and could be of use to the playwright and the development of any project. And so if you have the title of literary manager, you're concentrating the weight and the power in that position, when that is actually something that should be dispersed. That power should be dispersed throughout anybody who's theatrically engaging. Holy fuck, the second drink sometimes can really knock me on my ass. But it should be dispersed, and every single person should be empowered to hold an opinion. Most people do. Also shooting holes in my own argument, much like you did. I think a lot of people are full of themselves and full of their own opinion, but I also think that there's an equal number of people who don't share it with you because you are the expert. And it's not until you seek them out and ask them and reassure them that their opinion is valuable and that you are not in fact the be-all end-all of what constitutes good taste. Like, theater is a subjective art form. I think we can all agree on that. So why don't we all have the empowered to own our own opinions. I don't know.
But somebody's still got, in the new play context you're talking about, somebody still has to filter those opinions back to the playwright, right? Because absolutely, like the house manager and the people who work in the box office, right? The frontline people, they absolutely have an opinion, and they're going to hear opinions from patrons, and they're going to have to filter that back somehow. But that can't go totally raw and unfiltered right to the playwright, right? That needs to have some sort of buffer in there. So
if that is something that the playwright requires and says it, then I agree with you. But I think that you are touting a party line that infantilizes the writer and does not treat them like an adult.
No, I'm just thinking about,
most writers are adults who can understand the difference between a shitty note from somebody in the bathroom and
totally. Like, I'm just thinking about volume, right? Like, what is the structure that gets put in place to manage that feedback, right? And who is the manager of the feedback? So for me, it's not necessarily about having to, I think we coddle playwrights entirely too much in the American theater, right? These are grown ass artists who can
who should be empowered, not feel like they need to be taken care of and babied.
Exactly. But there still has to be a person who is that conduit to that conversation, right? And in a perfect world, I think that is absolutely the literary manager. The literary manager you describe is sort of like the all-knowing repository of whatever is, I mean, that's just kind of a dick who's trapped in like a shitty culture. So that's not necessarily, I don't think, the position's fault. That's just somebody who doesn't know how to get along with other people and is trapped in a situation that kind of like empowers that.
But it also could be the culture of the organization.
Absolutely. And getting back to what Tanya was saying before about the literary manager as the person who, like this notion of gatekeeper, right? Instead of thinking of gatekeeper, the notion of door opener, right? Because you can only open the door for so many plays, right? Because of the size of this pile. But the really good literary managers are the ones who are always trying to find a way to open that door. Is it this play? Is it that play? And given that, given what the role of an artistic director is in the American regional theater, now talking about sort of major commercial LORT theaters, that person doesn't have time to read as many plays as that person had time to read 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. There's no way. That person's a fundraiser. That person's a producer. That person's, making art and being public figurehead. So they have to have that artistic inspiration fed to them from somewhere, which has to be the literary manager.
Right. And I mean, think about it like a curator at a museum, right? Like we expect them to have a certain level of expertise. And yes, that doesn't mean, like, of course, a lot of people will have opinions and feelings about work, and those opinions and feelings are valuable and useful to know, and there should be an environment in which they can be shared. But I also think, like, ideally the person who is the literary manager, A, has some expertise, B, has has developed relationships and an understanding of the place that they're working, so they have some sense of like what is going to serve that place, that audience, and what's going to serve the artists who they could bring in, who's the right match for this place. But also hopefully, I mean, yeah, I think what Brent said, like, it's sometimes the problem is the culture, not the role. Like, it's like any job, whether you're a teacher, doctor, lawyer, it can like suck no matter where you are if the people that you work with or the structures
still a job
work,
still a job in an office.
But like, if so I think, I do think it would be valuable to come up with a new name for these things. Yes. I do think the title is not necessarily.
Oh, God, yes.
But I also think, like, you can thrive or like shrivel anywhere depending on what the environment is. So sometimes the question is like the management and the culture.
Yes, but that's exactly the crux of my argument, which is the regional theatrical system, which is underpaid and undervalued generally across the board, but particularly when it comes to the literary manager position. That's why when I was at a new play festival recently and I was trying to connect with other literary managers, and I realized, holy fuck, I am now of like an older generation. Like, I am no longer like because it necessarily changes over and people get out of it because it fucking sucks. Like they realize that it's a glass ceiling. They realize their own powerlessness, and or they do try to have ambition and they do want to do exactly what you said, which is to change the landscape, to create opportunities for writers, to advocate for them. And they realize that literary managers are not the platform in the regional system to do it. So if you have the ambition and you have the gumption, you fucking got out of that game.
Right. But I guess what I would say is the people who got in that game are often the very people who can make the change. You know, if they are the people who are the door openers and are the sort of like pullers to them of like exciting work, they can create those opportunities. Now, yes, in the current system, they may then have to shed that role and find a different role. But I also think like they're still sometimes playing that role. Like, I mean, I think it's interesting, you know.
The role still exists no matter what, because all of what you said is true. You have to read the pile. Artistic directors don't have time. Nobody has that kind of capacity and can also have donor lunches and do all of the other things that an artistic director needs to do. But I just think that the role needs to be divided across a broader scope of artistic staff membership.
Yeah, but what you're talking about is a total decentralization of artistic curation, right? And that is an amazing Valhalla to get to. But as long as we are in a position as an industry where we are saying artistic director, other people, I mean, that's a complete sort of subversion of the way of just that regional theater pyramid, right? And I'm not saying the pyramid's right. The pyramid is bullshit in a lot of ways, particularly if you're that person who's trying to say, hey, this voice, hey, this writer, hey, I think this will advance mission, right? But the line between literary management and artistic director curation in that specific capacity becomes so thin and blurry that you sort of start to think like, who's the artistic director here? Who's making the shots? And the really good literary managers are the ones who can internalize that artistic vision to the degree that they're able to say, ooh, this play is right up your alley. I know you're going to love this, right? And it becomes that symbiosis thing. But so many times those relationships fall apart because it is sort of that like, who's the lead curator question. And that's a place like rife with ego and craziness. So
well, and ego is exactly the problem. Like, I'm a dramaturg, so I have no ego. But and frankly, I get mad at other people that have one. I'm like, why? Stop it. But that's why. Yes, you hit the nail on the head. I think that we should live in an egoless Valhalla where the artistic curation is shared, and that will then engender more opportunities for risk, pushing the form forward, opportunities for writers, and it'd be a more exciting place to make art.
I'm with you, Kimberly. I agree.
Totally. Yes! Let's do it! We saw.
I mean, you run an MFA program now. You can create this space, right?
It, no problem.
You can train the greatest dramaturgs and literary managers in the American theater. You now have that power.
I know. Watch out.
But it's so exciting, really, right? Because to be able to take the experience that you have after how many years in the
She's not that old. Come on.
Well, I didn't. I was speaking more to like practical professional experience, not chronological age. Thank you. But to take all that experience when you are not to the point where you're quote unquote retired, right? The industry has not passed you by. You are very recent from functioning at sort of the top level American regional theater.
Oh, thanks.
And you can impart that to all of these students and maybe help them get it right. I mean, that's what's really exciting to me when people make these transitions that you're making between the professional theater and academia. So many times it's viewed as a retirement gig, or, oh, that person just couldn't take it anymore. But it's such a great opportunity to take all of the mistakes that we make on the practical side and say, hey, next generation,
why don't you fix it?
Let's do this better.
Totally. I mean, that was definitely a lot of my motivation to do it. Was I just feel like I have a lot of opinions about like how this actually should work. And I think that there's opportunity for people to, because so much of our industry has been just shaped by the people, because it's a new industry. You know, it's only like 50, whatever. It started in the, you know, the 60s, 70s. It's about the same age as I am, honestly. You know? And so like, it's new. And so it's being created. And so the things that are both exciting about it and the things that are really frustrating about it are often like just so grounded in the human beings who are doing it. And so if we can, you know, if we can offer a different vision for how it could work to those human beings, they can make it different. You know, it's not, I mean, it is more complicated in that we live in, we still live in the world, and like we live in a world, at least in this country, that doesn't necessarily value the arts particularly, you know, in the way that we wish that it would. And, you know, there's all sorts of structural things that are beyond our control to a certain extent. But there's a lot that's actually in our control. And so I think if we can, you know, if you can impart, like, here's what it should look like, then people might actually make that happen.
So we've solved theater, and it turns out that I thought we had an argument, but we're all in agreement. So I think that's good. Thank you, Tanya Palmer.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Excellent.